Hi, this is Allison Hunt. I'm going to read you some newspaper articles from the Slocum House that my mom sent me. I was a very small fish at Slocum House. I was around a lot, but I definitely didn't have a big role in a lot of things that went on there. So this is thank you if you've made it this far through some of the backstory about Hermine. I really appreciate that, but now we get to the fun things, and I'm just about to start doing my interviews with some of the main players from Slocum House. It's going to be really exciting to hear their stories. I just figured I would love to make videos and share their stories with everybody because it was such a neat thing to be a part of. So thank you for listening this far. I'm going to just read you some of these articles, and then later I'm going to have an interview with my mom where she can talk about the plays that she did. So this first article is from the play Two Roses, which I believe was my mom's very first play there. And this was from February 1986. Clever dialogue surmounts thorns. Oh boy, what an opening night was had by all at Slocum House Theater. In Act 1, a leading player got caught up in the rug. In Act 2, a rear wall came flying down on the actors. The lights were playing tricks, and the curtain was extremely late in its descent to signal intermission. In Act 3, a large potted rose bush kneeled over, and shortly after, when a hand reached out from backstage to prop it up, it fell over again to the other side, blocking the actor's central entrance onto the set. But a show must go on, and indeed this one did. The Slocum players are to be congratulated for taking all these opening night thorns in stride throughout Two Roses. Special kudos go to Sharon Rollins and Ron Carmona. She plowed right on through her silly, lengthy speech while propping up the wall that fell on top of her. Victorian romantic comedy, directed by Louise Snyder, is staged with flair and winning humor. Two Roses is not just a fluffy little ditty. It's a play of words, of witty and flowery ambiguities. It's a challenging literary play, penned by one James Alberry in 1870, that requires close listening or it's lost in the stars. The Roses are daughters Ida, Connie R. Merrill, and Lottie, Erica Nelson, Digby Grant Esquire, Robert Scoville, and their con artist father who tries to manipulate the romantic future. Digby is dirt poor until suddenly becoming heir to a fortune. Then it's the old story of the nasty effect money and status can have on people. There are 4 engaging performances in this production, and they are well delivered by Robert Blond, Wes Taylor, Patrick Nutt, and Sharon Rollins. Blond is the character, our Mr. Jenkins, masters the sneer and arrogance Victorian plays always demand. Taylor is the cool-headed solicitor who makes expert use of his favorite expression, "Dear me!" Nutt plays Ida's blind suitor who can see the ludicrousness others can't. Rollins is the boisterous our Mrs. Jenkins, who is otherwise known as the silver-gray mare that Mr. Jenkins doesn't know what to do with. He's like a thief with a big banknote. That's all I have for Two Roses. I'm so excited because we're going to hear from my mom, Connie Merrill, Dickhous. She got married in between, so we're going to hear from Sharon Rollins, the one and only. We're going to hear from Ron Carmona, who was mentioned in this article, for propping up the wall when it fell. Tony Bump, who did a lot of musicals, and we will find even more people than that. So thank you. Now I'll read the next article. So I have the front page picture from The Love Chase that features Sharon Rollins in it, but I don't have the article itself. I believe that this was my mom's second play. I'm not sure about what play this was for Sharon. So sorry we don't have the article, but it's a nice, beautiful front page picture. The next one I have is The Man from Toronto, which was directed by Sharon Casey Rollins, and my mom was also in this play. Obscure play by Slocum House imitates Goldsmith comedy. The old Slocum House Theater Company, which is in the habit of brushing the dust off obscure old scripts and bringing them to life on its boards, has done just that again. The Man from Toronto, directed by Sharon Casey Rollins, is the group's latest venture. Written at the turn of the century by Douglas Murray, this play tastes a little something like Oliver Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer. In She Stoops, now mounted at the Oregon Shakespearean Festival in Ashland, a proper young woman disguises herself as a parlor maid to snare her man. In the Slocum show, which opened Thursday night, the heroine also poses as a parlor maid to check out the man she's supposed to marry if she wants to secure a hefty inheritance. Judy Sanchez and Gaithel Ferguson star in the show. Also featured are Connie Hill, Toby Dillinger, Ken Greger, Mary Greger, Ken Champagne, Connie R. Merrill, and Lisa Cote. Champagne is the assistant director. From left to right in the picture, Connie R. Merrill, Lisa Cote, and Gaithel Ferguson in the Old Slocum House show. Cast rolls along nicely in period comedy. The Man from Toronto at the Old Slocum House Theatre Company. And this is May of 1987. The Man from Toronto is something to see in Vancouver. The Old Slocum House Theatre Company presents the sometimes hokey, turn-of-the-century comedy, written by Douglas Murray and directed nicely by Sharon Casey Rollins. Rollins and her cast, many of them newcomers, spray life into an obscure show that absorbs their antics like a sponge. Sometimes, however, the show does drag. Sometimes, and this seems a problem common to many period piece shows set in a place such as Devonshire. The actors drop their accents. In fact, several don't feign accents at all. But overall, this show hums along, offering laughs. In the three-act comedy, which opened last week, the heroine disguises herself as a parlor maid to get a good look at the man she is supposed to marry, if she wants to receive a handsome inheritance. Judy Sanchez plays the dual roles of the shrewd Mrs. Layla Calthrope, a woman used to upper-crust living but struggling on lower-end finances, and the sweet Polly Perkins, parlor maid. Sanchez, who hasn't been in a play since high school, serves up a lively performance. Her portrayal is particularly enjoyable when she's on stage alone with Gaithel Ferguson, who does a good job as Calthrope's hopeful Canadian suitor, Fergus Wimbush. Another strong actor is veteran Ken Champagne and Mr. Priestley, Miss Calthrope's uncle by marriage. Champagne, who is also assistant director, is no doubt the most polished actor in the show. He has his character down to the last flourish of his fingertips. As Priestley, he pushes to persuade Miss Calthrope into a profitable alliance, along with Wimbush's sisters, Ruth and Ada. Connie Renee Merrill as the self-serving Ruth, and Lisa Cote as the spirited Ada, offer interesting and many times funny portrayals of their characters. Newcomer Ken Greger also had some funny lines in Miss Calthrope's carefree cousin, Robert Gilmore. He discusses life with Miss Calthrope and laughs that maybe she should lay down and let destiny roll you out like a slab of dough. Another first-time actor, Mary Greger, is rememberable as Martha, the real maid. Her best moment is during a crying bout in the first act of the show. In cameo roles are newcomer Connie R. Hill as the hideous Mrs. Hubbard, and Toby Dillinger, a Y East junior high freshman, is Hubbard's dingbat daughter. Although the show is fairly predictable, a slight twist in the end does offer an element of surprise. The beauty of The Man from Toronto is that in a show running a little over 2 hours, based on a simple plot, and stocked with actors of limited or no experience, there's a lot of excitement. The next one is The Son-in-Law of Mr. Poirier. This is from July of 1987. Lead stumbles, but humor abounds in production from Slocum House. There are probably more pleasant ways to spend an evening than viewing The Son-in-Law of Mr. Poirier. Watching reruns of Fantasy Island and scraping moldy bathroom grout offer a couple of possibilities. Ouch! It's not that the evening is a total loss. Although many 19th century shows have fallen into oblivion, and mercifully so, this one has the potential to be funny still today. And at times it's hilariously funny, but those bright times are drenched by a pounding plethora of problems, most notably a lead who doesn't know his lines. Showing the clash of the 19th century French aristocracy, the comedy is directed by Hermine Duthie-Decker. She has done an admirable job. She's done an admirable job with the parts of the show that work. The Son-in-Law of Mr. Poirier, which opened Thursday night, begins the Old Slocum House Theatre Company's 7th annual Victorian Festival. The Sorcerer, directed by Tony Bump, will open July 23rd and run through August 1st. As Gaston, the son-in-law of Mr. Poirier, Robert Monroe offers an uneven performance. Perhaps it was opening night jitters, but he constantly had to be prompted for his lines. At first it was terribly disconcerting, like watching a juggler drop a flying pin, but after a while there was just the wish that Moreau would grab up the script and carry on. As an actor, he obviously has potential in developing his characters as the handsome and dashing aristocrat. But what's an actor without his lines? Despite his stumbling, however, the cast worked nobly around this roadblock. In fact, there's a delightful detour in the show, which begins slowly when Mr. Poirier, played by Mike Haywood, and Verdelet, played by Bob Madsen, begin their antics. M. Poirier, a working-class, well-off man, connives to keep his married daughter in his clutches and grab an aristocratic title at the same time, while manipulating his son-in-law. M. Poirier's cranky crony, Verdelet. This adds to the tension, which adds to the humor. When the two characters are on stage, the humor abounds. Haywood offers depth and energy into M. Poirier, so the character becomes a likable and stubborn scoundrel. Madsen does well with his understated crankiness. Connie R. Merrill as the daughter is fine. As Hector, the son-in-law's aristocratic friend, Jeremy Peck is all right. Annunciation could improve his performance. Aura Roline, as the maid, flits around like a character in an Alfred Hitchcock movie, raising the question of whether she is to be trusted. As creditors of the son-in-law are Gaethel Ferguson, Richard Ottenbach, and Steve Hansen. They could probably jazz up their roles by using a little bit more caricature. Other hazards in this show, although minor, are distracting. For example, the curtain bobbed in anticipation before an act was actually finished. Another thing, the lovely parlor set adds immensely to the period flavor, but chrome trays and modern newspapers detract. And the next one I have is Mr. Warren's Profession, September 1987. Fine casting rescues Shaw play. Now, I remember earlier Hermine was talking about plays done by Shaw, so I thought that was cool. She did a lot of old Victorian stuff, and when my mom started doing comedies, Tony started doing musicals, they started selling the place out. And Hermine even just kind of realized that sometimes times move on and you got to go with the newer stuff for the newer crowd, and that's kind of what happened. Mr. Warren's Profession. Lord help the world if everyone took to doing the right thing, Mrs. Warren warns her daughter. The right thing would be to brush off Mrs. Warren's Profession as irrelevant. An 1898 script by George Bernard Shaw. The show scandalized critics when it opened on Broadway. Today, the idea of a serious show about Mama as Madame seems melodramatic. Today, with a few changes, the show could possibly be dubbed Mrs. Warren's Profession. Unfortunately, it's impossible to resuscitate a dead play, no matter how much life actors try to breathe into it. Nonetheless, it may be wise to heed Mrs. Warren's advice. Issues such as hypocrisy in society, the status of women and mother-daughter relationships sustain this show, presented by the Old Slocum House Theatre Company. The best thing about it, however, is director Mike Haywood's adept casting. Connie R. Merrill is assistant director. All the players are suited to their roles. Granted, several in the 6-member cast may have dropped a line or two Friday night. A couple tore through opening lines like racers when the guns go off. And every so often actors forgot to wait for their well-deserved laugh. Furthermore, it seemed to be a problem, especially in the first act of the 2-hour show. Interaction between the players might have been more compelling. As often happens at this theater too, there are the offstage distractions of something crashing behind a flat or a train bellowing on tracks several blocks away. Enough complaining. The acting was good enough to keep the show alive. Sharon Casey Rollins offers a lively Miss Kitty Warren. Somehow, Miss Warren's fiery red hair exemplifies her ardent spirit. Flashy, sentimental, volatile, and coarse, Mrs. Warren maneuvers through her life and that of her daughter. Incidentally, a compliment to the costumers for enhancing character development through the appropriate wardrobes, especially that of Mrs. Warren and her daughter. Stephanie Parker plays the calculating and no-nonsense daughter, Vivi Warren. It's a pleasure to watch her character develop, although it's more like a rash than a rose, but she does capture the necessary chill. Richard Altenbach does a bang-up job of characterizing the rogue Frank Gardner, who is interested in Vivi's money more than he is interested in her. Gardner is the irrelevant son of the Reverend Samuel Gardner, played by F. Dale Poff. Although Poff is the epitome of pomp and hypocrisy, he definitely gives his character a likable side. Bob Madsen, a veteran to the Slocum House stage, shows his versatility. Robert Scoville also does fine as the lustful Sir George Crofts, who has an interest in Vivi as a business and bedroom alliance. You'll enjoy this show if you don't go expecting to see lots of humor, despite the Shaw authorship. There are funny moments. Casey Rollins and Stephanie Parker play mother and daughter in Mrs. Warren's profession. The next one I have is Her Step-Husband from February 1988. This light and lively effort trashes stodgy image. Slocum House effort shines. So you stayed away from shows at the old Slocum House because you imagined the company produces stodgy Victorian-era fossils. You couldn't envision spending an evening with cobweb characters and high-collared plot. Broaden your horizons, honey. Her Step-Husband has hit town. This delightful comedy by Larry E. Johnson was full of laughs and funny characters on opening night, Thursday. Directed by Julie Madsen, the show reels with wacky turns and tangles. Assistant director is Donna Hine. All of the actors are adept and memorable, which is wonderful considering some past Community shows. Few flaws mar the flow. Some brief technical botches, such as slow scene changes, missed light cues, and props being banged around backstage, aren't really worth mentioning, but one minor irritation is actors need to wait for laughs. The show centers on Mary Marshall, who has in letters boasted of riches and high living. Now she must concoct an elaborate charade to keep up her well-heeled visiting Aunt Emmy from the truth. Cindy Gregory, a versatile actress, offers a strong portrayal of the manipulative Mary. As Mary insists on the help of her husband and neighbor to present a picture-perfect home, Gregory shows off her comedic talents. She schemes, she wheedles, she talks her loving husband into pretending he's the butler. Her butler husband, played by Steve Hansen, at first seems to blend into the antique woodwork. However, Hansen offers just the right touch of sanity and stability Gregory's antics. Sharon Casey Rollins as Miss Emily Paisley, Mary's aunt, does a fine job. Rollins avoids stereotyping her character, which is especially evident when Aunt Emmy shares a few secrets of her own. Remember the wacky turns and tangles? Enter Mike Haywood as Limpy Lanigan, an ex-convict. Haywood is only on stage a matter of moments, but he won't be forgotten. This experienced Community actor is able to project his character, something fledglings and even more seasoned local players can learn from. Anthony Aguirre, another strong actor, plays Dr. Gerald Niles. Agar, if I pronounce people's names wrong, I sorely apologize, has the ability to react. He listens. His timing is good for this light-hearted fare. One of the strongest players and most believable in the whole show, however, is Judy Sanchez. Her apparent dry wit abounds in her juicy role as Stella, the maid. She ambles along in the newly hired domestic, observing practically everything in this house is borrowed from the neighbors, except the baby. Connie Merrill is fine as the silver-loaning neighbor, along with Carmel Baird as Mary's cousin. Ken Gregor offers a good backup as the local cop. One suggestion might strengthen the inevitable disastrous revelation scene in Act 3. Ham it up. At this point, the audience can figure out there will be some fireworks. Let's see a display, not some jumping jack tossed at our feet. At least this show is far from being a dud. That article was from the play her step-husband from February 1988. This next one is about Esther Short, the pioneer mother, which was written by Hermine Decker. This was June of 1989. Decker says performance her last. Old Slocum founder to direct own play. The story of Vancouver pioneers Esther and Amos Short will be dramatized by the Old Slocum House Theatre Company beginning Thursday, July 6, at the Historic Theatre at 605 Esther Street. Hermine Duthie Decker, founder and longtime head of the Old Slocum, is directing the production of her own play, Esther Short, or A Heroic Pioneer Mother. The drama, slated for a 4-weekend run, is a special presentation in conjunction with the State Centennial. The play was the first production ever mounted at the Old Slocum House. The dining sitting room of the modified Italianate villa, built in 1867 by Charles W. Slocum, was renovated into a 60-seat theater in the late 60s and early 70s. Esther Short opened in 1972. It was staged there again by Decker in 1975. This third time around, Decker, who is 81, is announcing that Esther Short will mark her final directorial effort at Slocum. Time will tell. Decker has announced retirement several times in the past, but always seems to come back and take the helm of another show. Decker has given 40 years of service to the community theater in Vancouver. From 1950 to 1971, she was the head of speech and theater at Clark College. In addition to getting many of her own scripts through production at Slocum, she has directed countless productions of Victorian-era dramas and comedies at the theater that specializes in that fare. A few years ago, Decker estimated she had directed about 100 shows in Vancouver. Esther Short is based on the lives of the woman and her husband who took out land claims in this area in the mid-19th century. The play focuses on the problems Esther and Amos Short confronted while raising 13 children and fighting for their lives and rights in the Promised Land. A Columbian review of the 1975 production praised Decker for lacing a bit of humor into her script. The piece also noted the ensuing controversy and the courageous role the Shorts played in the founding of Vancouver and local government make for an enlightening evening of theater. Judy Sloan, who starred in Clark College Spring '88 production of The Secret Affairs of Mildred Wild, makes her Slocum House debut in the title role. Slocum House mainstay Mike Haywood takes the role of Amos Short. Leading chief support among the cast of 15 are Connie Merrill as the Indian girl Weetoma and Gaithel Ferguson as the trapper Michael Piran. To achieve better dramatic effect, Decker notes that although the essential actions of this drama are based on true facts, certain fictional characters have been added, and the time elements have been juxtaposed. That's part 1, Revival of Decker's play Esther Short, Appropriate Fare. It's entirely appropriate that Washington's centennial festivities should include a revival of Esther Short, or A Heroic Pioneer Mother, by the Old Slocum House Theatre Company. Historical and theatrical connections abound. The theater space is a lovingly restored house on the corner of downtown Vancouver Park, deeded to the city by the actual Esther Short in the mid-19th century. The play premiered in 1972 as the first production staged there. Historical drama is not a static recollection of facts. Creating memorable characters requires both information and humanity. This personal perspective provides the source for the audience's empathy with the story. In Esther Short, writer-director Hermine Decker has created 2 compelling figures in Esther and Amos, pioneers who chose to stand and fight for their property when confronted by the hostile Hudson's Bay Company, the British fur conglomerate whose empire spanned most of the Pacific Northwest in the 1980s. As a result, Amos becomes the first probate judge for Clark County, paving the way for future territorial government. In addition to being a mother, Esther proves a feminist and an environmentalist. Like other early settlers of a note, she has courage, patience, and vision. She speaks with a simple, unaffected eloquence that remains relevant today. In contrast, Amos is the catalyst for the onstage action. As such, he speaks less evocatively than Esther. But his image of a strapping, intense father figure is part of the glue that holds the drama together. While interesting in the light of the centennial year, the play itself, however, seems old-fashioned in both content and structure. For example, the Indians in the story are more stereotyped than actual people. The play's ending seeks an emotional and historic resolution, but it must overcome an earlier resolution in the story that makes the finale somewhat after the fact. Still, it's a story worth knowing, and its length makes it accessible to the entire family. Judy Sloan and Mike Haywood are excellent as Esther and Amos. Both have drawn thoughtful characterizations. Their performances seem both spontaneous and natural. They take advantage of the theater's small confines, communicating on an intimate level with the audience. The rest of the cast isn't quite up to the same standard, though this may be due to the play itself. It seems other roles lack the substance given to Esther and Amos. Gaithel Ferguson as the trap Michael Piran and Shonda Sayers as eldest short daughter Jersera infuse their characters with spirit and emotion. Playwright Decker provides straightforward and uncomplicated direction. The onstage action is occasionally static, although this was probably due to the large cast and small stage. The period costumes are most effective, especially for the children. Esther Short, or a heroic pioneer mother, pays homage to two indomitable women, the play's heroine and its creator. Like Esther Short, Hermine Decker has provided something uniquely special to Vancouver's history. So I have the picture from the article about the wife who was kidnapped with Deborah Barnett and Mike Haywood in it, but I don't have the article itself, so sorry about that. Mike Haywood was one of the most amazing people and actors, and he was actually the editor of the Columbian for many years, but we'll talk about Mike Haywood later. So the next play I have is Dinner for Two, and this is the only one that I cannot find a year. I don't know what year this was done, but I think it was in the late 80s. It wasn't one of the later ones, so I don't have a date year, so I'm just going to throw it in there. Dinner for Two menu short on script. Dinner for Two is a play that fails to reach its potential. But don't blame the actors. Blame Nathan Harris, the author of the 3-act comedy, currently being presented by the Old Slocum House Theater Company. Cast members of Dinner for Two must feel like the Shakespearean actor who, as he was booed off the stage, mumbled, "Don't blame me, I didn't write this stuff." While the situation in Dinner for Two is humorous, the script isn't. Harris fails to produce words as funny as his storyline. That's bad news for the 8-member cast, which works hard to make Harris's play a winner. Setting for Dinner for Two is 3 adjoining rooms at the Alabaster Hotel in New York City. Samuel Coweys, recently married in London, is in the middle room. His bride Edith is one adjoining room, and actress Peggy Cross, a former girlfriend, is in the other adjacent room. Edith is a proper lady, so proper she doesn't stay in the same room with her groom of only 3 months. The Coweys are in New York so Sam can meet Augusta, a straight-laced aunt who is in control of Edith's finances. Aunt Augusta won't stand for a breath of scandal, but there is potential for scandal when Peggy discovers Sam in the room next door. Sam used to be in love with Peggy and expressed that love in letters to her. When Peggy left London, she fell in love with another man, while Sam fell in love and married Edith. Sam has failed to tell Edith about his affair with Peggy. Peggy doesn't know Sam is married, and Sam doesn't know Peggy is in love with another man. But the bellman, maid, and waiter, who provide the only genuine comedy in the production, know everything. Particularly delightful is Art Green, the bellman, who has an excuse to bail Sam out every tricky situation. Give dinner for two and E for effort. The actors give a good effort, but the script isn't snappy. Good. Art got a good review. Good old Art Green. The next one I have is For All the Saints. I have 3 different articles about it. And this was February of 1992. I remember this play is about stained glass people that come to life. And the costumes were just amazing. And I think that the lady that wrote it, she let them use the original costumes. And this poor guy, one of our fellow actors, his name's Tony Coughlin, is in this big blue bag. He's getting smacked around by a spoon, and Mike Haywood had some ridiculous part where he kind of bossed the guy around. It was very interesting. It was quite entertaining. Saints premiering at Slocum. Comedy toys with soiled sainthoods. With the economy wreaking havoc on ticket sales, many theater companies are playing it safe by producing proven box office winners. The Old Slocum House Theater isn't one of those cautious companies. In fact, the local stage company presents the West Coast premiere of For All the Saints, opening 8 p.m. Thursday at Slocum House. For All the Saints is a 2-act comedy written by Eileen Enright Hodgetts of Baden, Pennsylvania. She wrote the play in 1990. I've been fortunate enough to have ongoing communication with the author, said Connie Dickhous, the director of the Slocum House production. She sent a missing page of script and 4 original costumes. She also helped with some proper pronunciation of some of the words. Hodgetts will be in Vancouver for the February 29th Slocum House production of her play. Bill Sismar plays Marcellus, the molester, and Bethany Blosser is Blodwyn, the unblemished, and For All the Saints. Others in the cast are Michael Haywood as Saint Gaston de les Cordons Bleus, Tony Coughlin as the servant who spends most of the production inside of a large sack, Art Green as Roderick the record keeper, Sharon Casey Rollins as Elfreda, and David Taylor as Archangel Rashad. Setting for the comedy is a gloomy Gothic basement in a warehouse where stained glass windows are sent for storage after being removed from churches. While awaiting transfer, the characters from the windows are free to move around and talk. During the production, it becomes apparent that the past of some saints isn't all that saintly. The group has brought out the 2 p.m. Saturday performance, but some tickets may become available at the door. Saints amuses devilishly. West Coast debut is at Slocum House. Those doggone saints can be rascals too, especially if they're characters from Eileen Enright Hodgetts' comedy For All the Saints, which made its West Coast debut Thursday at Slocum House Theater. The play, presented by the Old Slocum House Theater Company, drew a favorable reaction from the opening night audience. The crowd didn't roar with laughter, but they were obviously amused by the 2-act comedy, which falls into the cute category. Setting For All the Saints is a Gothic basement in London where stained glass windows are restored after they've been removed from churches. While in the storage area, the saints come to life and are free to move around, talk with each other, and have a little fun. Roderick the record keeper and his wife Alfreda are in charge of the saints as they wait to be transported to another location. A new shipment of stained glass includes Marcellus the molester, Blodwyn the unblemished, Saint Gaston de Cordons Bleus, and a servant who is mistreated by Saint Gaston. Although he's included in the group, Marcellus is not a saint. He is a Roman soldier, a destroyer of innocents and virgins, who, according to legend, raped hundreds of women. He was placed in a church window in Wales as a reminder of how unclothed the Romans were when they ruled Wales. Blodwyn, who is a Welsh, was in the same church and has been eyeing Marcellus for 700 years. According to her legend, she is a shining example of purity. Saint Gaston is the patron saint of cooks and chefs. For centuries, he's been changing orders from heaven to keep his servant undeterred. The servant, who is nameless and faceless, is really John A. Pivert, poor John. He has been called to heaven several times, but Saint Gaston has always changed the order. When bumbling Archangel Rashad of Bombay arrives, it becomes obvious that the characters don't deserve their titles. Acting is a plus in this production, as Marcellus, muscular Bill Sismar, who has the body of an athlete, looks like a Roman soldier. Bethany Blosser's portrayal of Blodwyn provides just the right touch of a woman hiding something from her past. As St. Gaston, Michael Haywood wears a colorful Columbia blue and red costume that makes him look like a court jester. He's more than adequate in his role. Tony Coughlin, the servant, sweats his way through the production in a blue cloth sack. Even though he doesn't have a line of dialogue, he uses his body language to effectively communicate his feelings. David Taylor is amusing as the inadequate archangel who keeps mixing cliches. Sharon Casey Rollins, who plays Alfreda, delivers her line with an impressive Cockney accent, while Art Green relies on straight-ahead delivery as Roddick, the record keeper. Slocum House presents For All the Saints. I forgot Sharon was in that one too. I don't remember her part though for some reason. And I have a beautiful picture of Tony Coughlin in the blue sack. That one was something else. It was funny. Especially Mike Haywood's role is hilarious. Arsenic and Old Lace. February 1993. Arsenic and Old Lace to open. Comic play turns seemingly harmless sisters into killers. An old-fashioned comedy hits the boards when the Old Slocum House Theater Company opens Joseph Kesselring's Arsenic and Old Lace. The stage production, which plays 4 times a week through February at the Slocum House, opens at 8 p.m. Thursday. Central figures in the story are sisters Martha and Abby Brewster, 2 seemingly harmless old ladies. The elderly sisters murder lonely gentlemen callers and bury in their cellar. Connie Dickhous directs a cast headed by Julie Madsen as Martha Brewster and Sharon Casey Rollins as Abby Brewster. The cast also features Kobe Sullivan as Mortimer Brewster, Michael St. James as Teddy Brewster, and D.W. Andrew as Jonathan Brewster. Others in the show are Nicole Nelson, George Kostick, Patty Goodwin, Keith Jorgensen, Art Green, Greg Pierrot, Larry Smith, Tony Coughlin, and David Gray. A fine night with the aunties. Quality acting abounds in the Old Slocum House Theater Company's delightful production of Arsenic and Old Lace. Get out there and fight for a ticket to Arsenic and Old Lace. With seating limited to about 30 per performance, there are fewer than 800 tickets for the final 11 performances of the entertaining comedy, a show that should be seen by all who appreciate theater. The Old Slocum House Theater Company has a winner in Joseph Kesselring's charming tale about 2 lovable old ladies who poison lonely elderly gentlemen callers and bury them in their basement. Director Connie Dickhous has assembled a vivacious cast, one that attacks the script with spunk and spirit. Sharing the lead roles are Sharon Casey Rollins as Abby Brewster and Julie Madsen as Martha Brewster, the old ladies who do charity work by feeding arsenic lace elderberry wine to old dudes who don't have a home or family. The Brewster sisters figure the old guys are better off dead than living a loveless, lonely life. We're not murderers. It's one of our charities, Abby explains, of the dozens of bodies buried in the cellar of the Brewster home. Kobe Sullivan, Michael St. James, and D.W. Andrew are also strong players. As Mortimer, the nephew who discovers his aunts are doing away with old men, Sullivan turns into one of his best performances. His delivery of comedic lines is top-notch, and his facial expressions and body language have never been better. St. James steals the show as Teddy, the nephew who believes he's President Teddy Roosevelt. St. James is a hoot. He yells and blows a bugle to assemble his cabinet. In one scene, he appears with a lollipop in one hand and a yo-yo in the other. He digs the Panama Canal in the basement so Abby and Martha can bury yellow fever victims in the locks. Andrew, who has a made-over face, resembles Boris Karloff, is nephew Jonathan, the designated bad guy, a Chicago gangster returning home after a 5-year absence. He complicates matters by bringing a dead body with him. Also sparkling in supporting roles are Nicole Nelson as Elaine Harper, Mortimer's love interest, George Kostick as Dr. Einstein, Jonathan's partner in crime, Art Green is Officer O'Hara, a policeman aspiring to be a playwright. Greg Perot as Rooney, the know-it-all police lieutenant, who doesn't know as much as he thinks, and Tony Coughlin as Mr. Gibbs, who almost become the Brewster sisters' 13th charity case. A drawback is the length of the show before intermission. Arsenic and Old Lace was written as a 3-act play, but Slocum House has elected to present the first 2 acts before a break. It's 1.5 hours, a bit too long before an interval. And in this picture, we have Kobe Sullivan, D.W. Andrew, Michael St. James, Julie Madsen, Nicole Nelson, Sharon Casey Rollins, and George Kostick. If I pronounce names wrong, I'm sorry if it's your character or your last name. I severely apologize for that. Can't wait for all the big fish to share their wonderful stories. So I have one picture, but it doesn't have an article. And this is The Father, November 1994. Don Weed, Gareth Davis, and Art Green appear in The Father on stage at the Old Slocum House Theater. From left to right, Art Green is Pastor Jonas, Don Weed is Captain Aldo, and Connie R. Dickhous is Laura in Slocum House production of The Father. And this was November 94. Veteran Vancouver actor keeps Slocum House show moving at a brisk pace. Give Don Weed top billing, and he attacks his role with a vengeance. In a rare performance as a leading man, Weed sparkles as Captain Aldo in the Old Slocum House Theater's production of Swedish playwright August Strindberg's The Father. Better known in local theater circles for his supporting roles, this is Weed's first lead since playing Falstaff 18 months ago in Vancouver Community Theater's The Merry Wives of Windsor. Director D. Michael Haywood, who also adapted Strindberg's 1887 work for Slocum House, saddles Weed with hundreds of lines, and he responds just fine. He keeps the production moving at a brisk pace. The Father is sort of an 1880s version of The War of the Roses. The names are different. Weed is Captain Aldo, and Connie R. Dickhous is his wife Laura, but the vicious exchanges are reminiscent of Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner as Oliver and Barbara Rose and the warring couple in Roses. Strindberg wrote The Father shortly after a divorce, and he isn't shy about using Aldo to express his dislike of women. Aldo's zingers include, "Trust? With a woman involved? Huh. Women don't know it, but they're wicked by instinct. Curse you damn woman and all of your sex." At one point, an exasperated Aldo says, "I was so tortured by anxiety, my hair fell out." While The War of the Roses was viciously physical, The Father emphasizes mental cruelty. Laura, Aldo's wife for 2 decades, has been doing a mental trip on him for years. She has convinced most of Aldo's friends that he is crazy and tortures him by implying that he is not the father of their daughter, Martha. Because of doubt and insecurity, Aldo eventually lands up in a straitjacket. In addition to Weed, there is strong acting by Dickhous, who is adequately nasty and unlikable as Aldo's wife. The supporting cast includes Slocum House regulars, Art Green as Pastor Jonas, Aldo's brother-in-law, and Sharon Casey Rollins as Greta, Aldo's old nanny. Gareth Davis as Corporal Nordell and Marie Carrillo as Martha make their Slocum House debut, while Keith L. Scholl, who plays Dr. Easley, makes his acting debut. Don Weed left plays Dr. Chumley, and Kurt Aristat is Elwood P. Dowd, and the Old Slocum House Theater, Harvey. Unfortunately, I don't know what year this was. I'm going to say around 94, 93. Get real. Harvey hops away with laughs, charms. Performance at Old Slocum House has audience riveted. The Old Slocum House Theater Company has pulled a rabbit out of the hat with a wonderful production of Mary Chase's Harvey. Chase's comedy is about a wealthy gentleman named Elwood P. Dowd and his best friend, an invisible 6-foot white rabbit named Harvey. Harvey opened on Broadway in 1944 and ran for 1,775 performances. The script won Chase the Pulitzer Prize in 1945. Slocum House's production is a solid effort featuring several fine acting performances, led by Kurt Aristat as the amiable Elwood P. Dowd and Pat Rohrbach as Elwood's aided sister, Veta Louise Simmons. Aristat wins over the audience with his best acting since his award-winning performance in The Elephant Man. Despite his already tippling and imaginary hair, Elwood is attentive, generous, and loving. Aristat is a charming Elwood as he laughs, smiles, winks, and elbows Harvey in the ribs. He is so harmless, honest, and straightforward. I've wrestled with reality for 30 years, and I'm happy to say I won out. That you really want to believe there is an invisible rabbit. As a character who wavers between not believing and believing in Harvey, Rohrbach does a fine job in a difficult role. She is best at the beginning of Act 2 when she is shell-shocked after mistakenly being committed to a mental hospital. The supporting cast is led by Angie Dermes, who, in her stage debut, turns on a fine performance as Dowd's niece, Myrtle May. Phil Mosier is Dr. Lyman Sanderson, a young psychiatrist who is too sure of himself. Art Green has his first sex symbol role as Wilson, the mental institution's security guard, and Tony Coughlin as his career best performance as E.G. Lofgren, the cab driver who keeps the meter running. Good for you, Tony. Good review. Have Captain Applejack from May 1995. Take a fantastic journey with Captain Applejack. Comedy and fantasy come to stage in the Old Slocum House Theater Company's production of Captain Applejack. Walter Hackett's 3-act play opens at 8 p.m. Thursday. Performances will continue through May 6th. The play is set in the winter of 1920 in the library of Pulperin, Cornwall, house owned by Ambrosia Applejohn, who has reached middle age and feels that time has passed him by. He decides to sell his home and travel the world looking for adventure. When he falls asleep in his chair, he dreams of the notorious Captain Applejack, and his life is changed forever. Connie R. Dickhous directs a cast that includes Don Weed as Ambrosia Applejohn, David Gwynn as Lush, Dawn Freeman as Poppy Fair, Lynn Doyle is Agatha Whitcomb, Laura Castle is Anna Valeska, and Angie Brown is Mrs. Pingard. Others in the cast are Art Green as Horace Pingard, D. Michael Haywood is Ivan Borlisky, Tony Coughlin is Bill Dennett, Troy Olson is Johnny Jason, and Jay Dickhous as one of the crew. I have an article that's talking about some of the actors, the Madsons, Julie and Bob Madsen, that were involved with Slocum House. This is from June of 1995. Madsons recognized for local theater work. When Julie and Bob Madsen made their stage debut in 1980, they were directed by Hermine Decker, a dominant figure in Vancouver theater. The name of the play was Victoria's House, and it was a drawing room mystery, Madsen said. Julie had been in a high school play, but I never set foot on a stage. We were really greenhorns, and Hermine was a very tough taskmaker. Even though it was an amateur theater, she believed you had to be professional in your manner and etiquette. She was old school and a bit of a terror, Julie Madsen said. She was sure her way was the right way. The Madsons credit Decker with teaching them the fundamentals of the theater. So it is appropriate that 15 years after their first encounter with Decker, they are the recipients of the Hermine Decker Award. The honor is named for the founder of the Old Slocum House Theater Company and recognizes individuals for their outstanding contribution to Clark County theater. The Decker is presented each year by the Columbian. The Madsons received their award Saturday at the Clark County Performing Arts Awards ceremony at the Columbia Arts Center. Since meeting Decker, the Madsons had been active participants in Clark County theater, with each performing in more than 30 plays. He has directed 3 shows and she has directed 2, including directing her husband in The Passerby at Slocum House. Decker taught the Madsons the theater from the ground up. She knew her stuff, Madsen said. She taught us the basics, like what to eat and drink, and what not to eat and drink before a performance. Not to move a prop except your own. Show courtesy to performers on the stage when you are off stage, and lots of other things. In addition to teaching stage fundamentals, She had them learn all areas of the theater company. She assigned them to work on the mailing list, handling box office duties, and round up props for the shows. They had designed and built sets. They had been stage managers and operated lights. Both helped with the day-to-day operation of theater companies by serving on the board of directors for Blue Parrot and Slocum House Theater Companies. She currently is on the board at Blue Parrot, and they have shared their talent with several Clark County theater groups, appearing in plays at Slocum House, Blue Parrot, Clark College, and Dream Chasers. She has won the Best Supporting Actress Award for The Silver Whistle, The Hollow, and he for the Best Supporting Actor Award winner for I Never Sang for My Father. At Slocum House, Julie Madsen began preparing the wigs for the theater company shows. In recent years, she also had prepared wigs for other companies. Her toughest challenge came this season, Productions, presentation of the musical 1776. For 1776, she spent several weeks cleaning, washing, and curling as she gave more than 20 wigs a Continental Congress look. There was no let-up when the show opened since she had to clean and comb virtually every wig after each performance. What I went through for a bunch of guys who don't know how to handle or care for a wig, she said with a laugh. I had to comb most of the wigs after shows, and that was quite an experience. For her efforts in 1776 and other shows, she received a Judge's Eye Award Saturday, recognizing her preparation of wigs. With the Decker, the Madsens joined previous winners Carol and Keith Neubauer, Linda Greep, Mark Osley, Tony Bump, Dan Anderson, Lisa Duvall, Gretchen Van De Water, and D. Michael Haywood. I have Come Back Little Sheba, February of 1996. Sheba gets boost from talented cast. The Old Slocum House Theater Company has a rock-solid production of Come Back Little Sheba on the Slocum House stage. Set in a rundown neighborhood in a small Midwestern town, the story follows the adventures of Doc and his wife Lola. Mike Haywood as Doc and Sharon Casey Rollins as Lola lead a strong cast that include Laura Castle as Marie, Sean Cates as Turk, and Jeff Hayes as Ed Anderson. Haywood is particularly strong as Doc, a reformed alcoholic who is teetering on the brink of returning to his alcoholic ways. As Lola, Rollins has the task of trying to keep Doc on the straight and narrow while worrying about the family dog Sheba, which ran away from home a few weeks earlier. The love story features Castle as Marie and Cates as Turk, a star javelin thrower on the track team. The story is carried out on an impressive set design by Connie and Jay Dickhous, Mike Haywood and Art Green, that combines the kitchen and front room of Doc and Lola's home. Tops in the acting department are Haywood as Doc, Rollins as Lola, and Castle as Marie. Come Back Little Sheba, featuring a cast both rich in talent and depth, plays through March 2nd at the Slocum House. Elmo, Roger Callis, Doc, Michael Haywood, and Ed Anderson, Art Green, appear in the Old Slocum House Theater production of Come Back Little Sheba. That was one heck of a play when you had Sharon and Mike doing the leads. It was so emotional, and I just remember how emotional it was. It was amazing. I believe they both won awards for it, too. An Ideal Husband, September 1997. An Ideal Solution, Go Wild at Slocum House. Vancouver Theatre Group presents the wit of Oscar Wilde's An Ideal Husband, opening September 18th. Even though Irish writer Oscar Wilde penned his comedy An Ideal Husband in the 19th century, its themes of political scandals, frailties of human character, and absurdity of modern morality seem to fit seamlessly in contemporary America. The story introduces the title character, Sir Robert Chiltern, Phil Mosier, as a righteous civil servant who has risen to the position of government minister. Yet, when a blackmailer threatens to reveal a mistake of his youth, Chiltern contemplates whether life as he knows it will crumble. The Old Slocum House Theater Company will perform the play from September through August 4th in the company's theater. Chiltern made his mistake as a young man when he learned through his work of the British government's impending commitment to build a canal in Suez of northeast Egypt that connects Africa and Asia. Chiltern sold the tip to a stock manipulator for a handsome fee, which helped to finance his budding political career. He was selling out for ends that seemed noble at the time, director Michael Haywood said. About 20 years later, Chiltern had become a powerful civil servant and is reminded of his unethical deed by a blackmailer named Laura Chevalier, Connie Dickhous, who even has a letter Chiltern wrote to prove it. Chevalier demands that Chiltern throw his support towards a similar canal project in Argentina, which she has invested heavily in and he thinks is a fraud. To add to his problems, Chiltern's wife finds out about the blackmail attempt and is revolted by her husband's past. Vancouver actress Peggy Gleason plays Chiltern's wife, Lady Gertrude, a bit uptight and righteous, before being confronted with the dilemma. As the play unfolds, she has to decide how to handle the situation. Growing up, I tended to see the world more in black and white, Gleason said, but as I got older, I realized everybody has faults. People have to learn from them and accept others for who they are and what they are and not try to change them. She said she thinks her character grows in that direction. Wilde makes a point of letting people know there are bad things that happen, she said, and they should get over it. Oscar Wilde comedy on at Slocum House. Connie R. Dickhous left. Phil Mosier and Peggy Gleason perform a scene from Oscar Wilde's An Ideal Husband. The Old Slocum House Theater Company production continues tonight at 8 in the company's Esther Short Park Theater. So I don't know what year Crooked Money was done. I don't quite remember what year that was. Crooked Money is on the laugh track with great groaners. One of the best things about Crooked Money, the stage play that opened Thursday at Slocum House, is some of the script's corny yet hilarious lines. You know, the groaners, the ones so bad you're ashamed to laugh, but you just can't help it. Here's a few examples. As Elizabeth, Connie Dickhous, and Bubbles, D. Michael Haywood, are talking on the set, she asks how he came to the home of Ulysses Good. I came through a pretext, he says. Thank God it wasn't through a window, she replies. Later, Bubbles passes along some advice to Clyde, Flint Kravitz. Pretend it's all a big joke. That's what married men do when their wives catch them in a lie. Playwright Miles McCarthy's script isn't always that snappy, but there are good enough gems to allow the Old Slocum House Theater Company to mount an entertaining production of Crooked Money. And for this production, Slocum House, the theater that specializes in plays from the Victorian era, moves into the 20th century. Crooked Money is one of those delightful stories about a group of people who are trying to help a good man who has fallen on hard times. Ulysses, Don Weed, has been living in near poverty since $50,000 was stolen from him 16 years earlier. People in search of money start showing up at Ulysses' home, most in hopes of finding the money and returning it to Ulysses. All except Wallace, Greg Perot, want to help Ulysses. Wallace wants the money for himself. There are, of course, love interests, and the play has a few tricky plot twists before things all get sorted out in the end. Best performance is by Sharon Rollins, who was splendidly cast as twin sisters, Sarah and Mary. That's the one where she played good twin and then an evil twin. She said that was fun. And then there's Bus Stop. I don't have the article that goes with the picture, unfortunately. That one was done in 2008. That one swept the awards that year, which was cool because Slocum House always kind of got shafted in most of the award ceremonies in Vancouver. We got kind of shafted for a long time, and that time we actually got a bunch of awards. So that one was really, really fun. Now I have an article. Now Mike Haywood, which now you've heard quite a bit about him, he was also the editor for the Columbian, and I have a small article that he wrote. Community theater, like golf, is sweet seduction. The other afternoon before rehearsal, I got to musing about my hobby, community theater. That often happens late in a play's progress towards opening night. The first curtain for paying customers goes up at 8 this evening. I'll not specify the name of the theater company or the location. To do so would be to leap the bar of conflict between vocation and avocation. In any case, a dozen of us have been working on the production for 6 weeks, which is about average. We've been spending at least 3 hours a night, 3 nights a week together. That does not count hours spent committing script to memory. At my age and shaky state of short-term memory, that can take half an hour a line, with some roles running a couple of 100 lines or more. This week we've been at the theater every night starting at 6 and working until as late as 11, putting on the finishing touches, we hope. Experience and superstition tells us that at least one thing will go really wrong tonight, and we can only hope the audience will not notice or be distracted too much to continue the suspension of disbelief. Over the next 4 weekends, if our regular audience members like the show and tell their friends about it, some 800 people will pay as much as $6 each to watch us do our thing. If we're lousy, maybe a couple hundred will show up. Whatever happens, I'm already committed to direct the next one, and will hold auditions Monday and Tuesday nights. You can look it up. Family and acquaintances and colleagues wonder why. Most friends know the answers, as they are in it with me. I've worn out my glib rejoinder. Keeps me off the streets and out of the bowling alley. Actually, it is a lot like most any other pursuit, like golf. The big stars from Jack Nicklaus to Tiger Woods get heaps of loot just for showing up. They are followed by a small herd of players who make a good living at the several professional tours. Then there's a legion of club pros who are good enough to teach and still might make it big someday. Next are the country club members, then the dedicated public link players, then people who play once in a while for business and social reasons. Next are those who tried it a few times and hated it. Then come those who watch golf played if they have to stop along the freeway near Hazeldale Golf-A-Rama. Then come those whose sole experience with golf was watching Woods play the last hole at the Masters. Theater's big stars, like golf's, everybody knows. When Jimmy Stewart and a couple of others died a week ago, it was top interest news. The big stars get plum roles whenever they want, wherever they want, as long as they want, and they got paid enormous amounts of money. Several thousand people who make some kind of living in theatrical pursuits range all the way down to extras who fill the audiences for infomercials. Many more from day jobs, always telling themselves they are really actors or directors or producers waiting for the right vehicle. Some, when they do make it big, enjoy writing and acting in plays about the desperate times. Think of Tootsie and Waiting for Guffman. For just 2 examples. The club's pros straddle the gulf between acting as a day job and the amateur stage. Some teach drama in high schools and colleges. Some have their own theater companies and almost make money some of the time. Among the majority of the population who have never seen live theater and don't much care if they do, are a few who give in to the temptation to give the stage a try. Typically, one gets dragged into a show, sign-ups for notices of future shows, get listed for audition calls, and ends up with a part. Some get addicted. Most are able to shake it off after no more than a dozen shows. In my group, maybe 24 of us in this community are like the duffers who hit the links at least a couple of times every week, year in and year out. We are more dedicated than talented. We buy whatever equipment and training we can squeeze out of the family budget, just as we steal chunks of time here and there from people with whom we might better share it. We rarely get paid a dime. Our compensation is audience reaction of any kind with enthusiastic applause, a sweet, seductive bonus. Each of us harbors some spark of fantasy that a wandering talent scout would show up in the green room some night with a contract for Broadway or Hollywood or Ashland. Most of us are realists, able to keep the fantasy spark from burning too painfully. By the way, I played about 24 rounds of golf in my 20s and 30s. I broke 100 once. I still have the clubs. Sometimes they come in handy as props on stage. Written by D. Michael Haywood, the editor of the Columbian. He's not anymore. He passed away. But God bless you. Stay tuned for the next round, because now it's going to get fun when I get to do some footwork and we get to hear from the people that were heavily involved in this, and I can't wait to share it with you.